Greetings, YouTube. So looking at Lancer recently, it talked about how the different eras of colonization that humanity went through. And the first people that left the Earth in relativistic vessels. So vessels that cannot exceed the speed of light and that have slow accelerations up to the maximum speed, whichever it was. And the better ones could go faster than the slower ones, but none of them could ever get even close to the actual speed of light. And you have to speed up to then, and you have to slow down, so it's a very long process, and it can take centuries to get to any place you need to go to. So thinking about that, for me, I really perceive that as having three different types of colonization efforts. Now, the lowest tech, but quite possibly the most complex version, are generation ships. So you build a very large vessel, probably a cylinder that you can rotate along its axis. That way you've got artificial gravity in the inside, big enough to house 50,000, 100,000 people. That would be the ideal. Probably 50,000 and with enough room for 100,000. And then you just head out, aimed at a star that you know has a xenoplanet that you are fairly sure can support human life. Now, it's going to take you hundreds of years to get there. So the humans that arrive are not going to be the humans that departed. And how do you know that those humans care about the mission the same way that the people that started it did? Yes, you can have propaganda and education, and there will be true believers all the way around. I'm sure that there will be those who have almost a religious fervor about the idea. But there are going to be people who their entire lives have been inside that generation ship. That is their world. The concept of standing on a planet and looking up in the sky with nothing over them is going to terrify some people. There's going to be severe bouts of agoraphobia. So some of them may want to stay on that generation ship, never leave. Even if they successfully colonize a planet, there may be some diehards that stay there and maintain the generation ship as an orbital habitat and a useful connection to other celestial bodies within that system. It becomes the jumping off point to go to the moons and planets that are elsewhere in the system that humanity has now decided to stake plant a flag on. And I think there's a lot of room there for a really dynamic role-playing environment with folks that want to stay on the habitat, those who want to become explorers, those who want to go to the actual world itself and never leave. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this. Now, the second type is more technically advanced, and that is sleeper ships. Now, the sleeper ships is where your entire all the colonists are going to be put into stasis chambers of some variety. So that means that there needs lower life support requirements, lower mass requirements for the vessel to get you to the place you need to go. You're not going to have to provide an artificial gravity for as much of the ship. There's big sections of the ship that don't need it. If a person's in cryosleep, what do they care whether they do or do not have artificial gravity? So the complexity of the ship in many ways could be simpler than a generation ship. But you are going to need to have people to maintain it, so they're going to be on a rotating schedule, some going in and coming out of stasis on a regular basis. And Lancer made an interesting idea that you can't, the type of stasis that they used, and they have it in the setting, you can't go much beyond 100 years without suffering some detrimental effects. So all of the colonists, every 100 years or so, they're brought out and say they're required to spend a year out of cryosleep, and then they go back in again. So if it takes 4 centuries to get where they need to go, they have spent 4 years living on this vessel, but the entire group of the colonists are never awake at the same time. So again, smaller requirements for air and water and food and all that stuff. So it's going to have some echoes of the generation ship, but on a much smaller scale. And I think that's much more doable from a technical standpoint. Maintaining an entire biosphere is not going to be easy. Okay, so on a sleeper ship, it's going to be simpler. And other than that, the people, when they get to the system, are far more likely just to land on the planet and start the colonization process, because they're not going to find themselves with that same connection to the vessel that the generation folks did. It's just a vessel to get them from Earth to the new place. That's it. They haven't grown up generation after generation on that vessel. The idea that, their great grandparents were born on that generation ship, and so are they. They have to go back 400 years before they have a relative that wasn't born on that ship. People in a cryosleep ship don't have that connection, so they're far more likely to just go to the planet. Now, they're smart. They'll leave the sleeper ship in orbit, and again, use it as a jumping off point to get elsewhere in the system. Now, the last form of colonization is the most technically complex because it's a seed ship. This is a ship that only has genetic material on board from the plants and the animals of Earth, as well as, say, a genetic sampling of 100 million humans. Okay? And it's completely controlled by AI. True AI, not the machine language stuff we've got kicking around now. And there may be some sleeper ship aspects to it. There may be a crew that have to be waking up to do audits and stuff every decade or so or something like that. But by and large, it's just the crew. Now, if they do it well, you would have no crew at all. It would just be an AI ship. Now, the reason I say this is the biggest opportunity to have a completely fresh start, absolutely severed from Earth. This would allow a colony to have no connection to our pasts at all. They could design a language that has no bearing on Earth. They could never bring up any history except the history of the vessel, history of the journey, and the history of the colony. That the people born on that world in the incubators that the ship runs, they're writing the history right then. Clean slate. A language without pronouns. There's no he and she. Everyone's a plural they. No masculine, feminine attire. Everything's just clothing. And as they get older and they decide they want to start to differentiate how they appear, they just do. They develop their own styles, their own looks, their own societal connections. And every 9 months, they crank out, how many incubators. Say you've got 1,000 incubators. So every 9 months, another 1,000 people, another 1,000 people, another 1,000 people. And you probably do that, you want to have 100,000 people. That would probably be a good, solid foundation. And you probably want to keep those incubators around because they're going to be people that never want to have children themselves. And it also means that if the AI thinks it's necessary, you could pull genetic material from the bank and create new humans that have no genetic connection to any of the existing humans to always make sure there is a fresh genetic spring that never runs out. It is an endless source of genetic diversity. That way you're never going to have to worry about a group becoming inbred, or if there's a social collapse of some variety, you can always put new genetic material into society at large. And to me, that's the most fascinating, because you could have a truly alien human culture, one totally severed from ours, one not shackled to any of the things that we are currently having to deal with. And that fascinates me. I would love to see what happened. That would be really damn cool. So those are just some thoughts I had at work one night about different concepts for colonization of the star systems out there in a relativistic universe. So you don't have any jump drives, you don't have any inertial drives that just go from 0 to light speed instantaneously. I'd like to point out that I've read quite a bit of physics in my day. I can't do the maths. I'll never understand it. My brain doesn't work that way. But I've still read a lot about it, and I have a really firm grasp of physics and for a layperson. And I never really was able to grasp the concept that is, the closer you get to the speed of light, the more mass you acquire. That made no sense to me. Okay? Then I had read a book, and I wish I could remember the author's name, and I can't. And he explained it in a way that made perfect sense to me. And his way of explaining is that you have a set amount of energy. And that energy is split evenly between moving you through space and moving you through time. And as you spend more of that energy to move through space faster, the amount of energy you have to move you through time goes down. So as you get faster and faster and faster, your relationship to the universe gets slower and slower and slower. So even though subjectively for you on board that ship, everything's just fine, comparing you to the universe outside, you are moving at an incredibly slow pace. And that made sense to me. And that's the way I've been able to understand it to this day. Now, I don't care if that is considered to be a less accurate definition of how that works. I'm comfortable with it. It helps me understand the concept, and it does not make my head hurt. So let's talk about generation ships. How would you use them? Do you have a favorite relativistic style? How many out there know what the SS Warden is? I'm going to see if anybody gets that reference. Let's talk about generation ships and sleeper ships and seeder ships. And how would you use them in your game?